Once upon a time, in the city of Port Harcourt, there was a large government hospital. The air inside had a sharp, clean smell of medicine and disinfectants. A smell that always made your stomach feel a little tight with worry. In a quiet room on the third floor, a young woman named Gianna sat perfectly still on the hard, uncomfortable plastic chair. She was watching her mother, Mama Deborah, who was sleeping in the hospital bed. The only sound in the room was the soft, rhythmic pulse of a machine next to the bed, which made a steady sound. Beep, beep, beep. That little electronic sound was the most important sound in the world to Gianna. It was a constant whisper of hope, a reminder that her mother's brave heart was still beating, still fighting to get better. Gianna's hands were clasped tightly in her lap, squeezing a small stack of folded papers. They were the hospital bills, and with each passing day, the stack grew a little thicker. She didn't need to unfold them to know the number written at the bottom of the last page. It was a number so big it seemed unreal, a number that felt like a mountain she could never hope to climb. A sad, heavy lump had formed in her throat, making it hard to swallow. Gianna was only 21 years old, a young woman with a future she had painted in bright, beautiful colors. Her biggest, most cherished dream was to go to the University of Port Harcourt to study law. She imagined herself in a courtroom one day, a strong and confident lawyer, using her voice to help people who had been treated unfairly. But now, sitting in this quiet, sterile room, that vibrant dream felt like a story from a children's book, a lovely fantasy from a world that wasn't hers anymore. A soft rustle of the sheets brought Gianna's attention back to the bed. Mama Deborah's eyes were slowly, carefully opening. A weak but loving smile touched her lips when she saw her daughter. "Gianna," she whispered, her voice as thin and delicate as a dry leaf. "You are still here." Gianna quickly blinked away the tears that had started to form in her eyes and leaned in, her own smile bright and warm. "Of course, I'm here, Mama," she said softly. "You just need to rest and get your strength back." Her mother's hand, so thin but still so warm, moved across the white sheet and found Gianna's. She held it with a surprising strength. "My dear daughter," Mama Deborah whispered, her eyes looking deep into Gianna's. "You must promise me something. Promise me you will not let me stand in the way of your education. Your dream of becoming a lawyer, that is your future. Do not give it up for me." Gianna's heart felt like it was being squeezed by a powerful hand. She loved her mother more than words could say, and she knew this dream was for both of them. She nodded slowly, the movement feeling stiff and dishonest. How could she promise such a thing? How could she focus on books and lectures when the cost of the very medicine keeping her mother alive was a debt she could never pay? Just then, the door to the room creaked open, and the hospital director, a stern, serious man named Mr. Michael, walked in. He adjusted his shiny glasses on his nose and looked at Gianna without a hint of warmth. "Miss Gianna," he said, his voice as cold and hard as the tiled floor, "I am sorry to disturb you, but we must discuss your mother's bill. This is a hospital, not a charity. We have given you as much time as we can. If you cannot provide a significant payment by tomorrow morning, we will have no choice but to discharge your mother." The word discharge hit Gianna with the force of a physical blow. Discharge her mother? Send her home, away from the life-saving care, away from the doctors, away from the steady, hopeful beeping of the machine? It was unthinkable. Gianna shot to her feet, her hands trembling. "Please, sir," she begged, her voice cracking. "Please, just a little more time. I will find the money. I swear I will." But Mr. Michael had already made his decision. He gave a slight, impatient shake of his head and turned his back on her. His polished shoes made loud, unforgiving clack-clack-clack sounds as he walked down the long, empty hallway, each sound like a hammer blow to Gianna's breaking heart. She was left alone in the sudden, deafening silence, with only the beeping sound and the impossible weight of his words. She slowly sank back into her chair, covered her face with her hands, and for the first time that day, she let the tears come, her shoulders shaking with silent, desperate sobs. That night, Gianna needed to escape the suffocating quiet of the hospital. She walked out into the lively, chaotic streets of Port Harcourt. The city was a kaleidoscope of sound, sight, and smell. Music with a heavy beat spilled from brightly lit shops, car horns blared in a familiar rhythm, and the air was thick with the delicious, smoky aroma of street vendors grilling fish and bole. Normally, Gianna found comfort in the vibrant energy of her home city, but tonight, it all felt loud and overwhelming. A world away from her own silent panic. She needed help. She needed a miracle. As she navigated the crowded sidewalks of Abba Road, she saw a small group of girls she recognized from some of her college courses. Their names were Joan, Nancy, and Loveth. They were gathered under a bright street lamp, dressed in glamorous, sparkling clothes that seemed to shimmer in the light. They were laughing, their voices bright and carefree, as Joan showed off a brand new, top-of-the-line smartphone. "I can't believe he just gave it to you," Nancy exclaimed, her eyes wide. "I know," Joan said, twirling a piece of her long, braided hair. "He's a very rich man I met. He's so sweet. He said he just enjoys my company, so he sends me money and gifts all the time." "You are so lucky," Loveth added with a giggle. "The man I've been talking to offered to buy me a car. Can you believe it? Just for being his friend." Gianna stopped walking, hidden in the shadows just beyond the circle of light. She felt a chill spread over her skin, even in the warm, humid air of the Port Harcourt night. The girl's words echoed in her mind. They were talking about getting money, huge amounts of money from wealthy men, simply for spending time with them. The idea felt strange and uncomfortable, like trying on clothes that didn't fit, something that belonged to a person she wasn't. "No," she thought, shaking her head firmly. "I could never do that. That's not who I am." But as she turned to walk away, a clear, painful image of her mother lying in the hospital bed flashed in her mind. She saw her mother's tired but loving smile, and she heard the cold, final words of Mr. Michael. The fear of losing her mother was a physical thing, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. A desperate war began inside her. Her pride, her values, everything she believed about herself, was fighting against the raw, powerful instinct to save her mother at any cost. When she finally returned to the hospital, she lay down on the small, uncomfortable cot that had become her bed. She stared up at the cracked ceiling, the sounds of the city outside fading into a distant hum. She thought about her promise to her mother to protect her future, and she thought about the promise she had to make to herself to protect her mother's life. Tears began to slip silently from the corners of her eyes, tracing paths down her temples and into her hair. In the quiet darkness of the room, she whispered a new promise, her voice shaking with the weight of her decision. "Mama," she breathed, "I will do whatever it takes to save you." In that heartbreaking moment, Gianna made a choice that would set her on a path she had never imagined walking. In another, much quieter part of Port Harcourt, in a magnificent mansion in a neighborhood filled with lush gardens and high walls, a man named Maxwell stood looking out a floor-to-ceiling window. Maxwell was one of the richest and most powerful men in Nigeria. He owned companies that built towering skyscrapers and ships that sailed across the world. He was handsome, intelligent, and his name was known by everyone who mattered. Tonight, he was hosting a large, important party. His home was filled with influential people in expensive suits and glittering dresses. Music played softly from hidden speakers, and waiters moved silently through the crowd with trays of delicious food and sparkling drinks. But Maxwell was not enjoying his own party. He felt like an actor on a stage, playing the part of a happy and successful host. Inside, where no one could see, he felt a deep, unshakable loneliness. He knew that nearly everyone at his party wanted something from him, a business deal, a job, his money. His best friend, a kind and clever man named Gabriel, came to stand beside him at the window. "Maxwell, my friend," Gabriel said in a low voice. "You look like you are carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders. You have 100 of the city's most important people in your home, and yet you look completely alone." Maxwell let out a long, slow breath. "Sometimes, that's exactly how I feel," he admitted. He remembered a time, years ago, when he had allowed himself to trust someone, a woman he thought loved him for who he was, but she had left him for a man with even more money, a painful lesson that had taught him to build a high, protective wall around his heart. "So what is it you are truly looking for?" Gabriel asked, his voice full of genuine concern. Maxwell's gaze went past his own reflection in the dark glass to the millions of twinkling lights that made up the city of Port Harcourt. "I'm looking for someone real," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Someone with a good, honest heart. Someone whose loyalty can't be bought with money." He had no idea that across the city, under one of those twinkling lights, a young woman named Gianna was about to be forced to find a way to pay an impossible price. Not for herself, but for the person she loved most in the world. The next morning, Gianna made the hardest phone call of her life. She called her classmate, Nancy, and asked for help. Nancy understood immediately and gave her a phone number for a man named Noble. "He's a fixer," Nancy explained. "He connects people." With a hand that trembled, Gianna dialed the number. Noble's voice was quick and professional. He asked Gianna many questions, listening carefully to her answers. Finally, he said, "I may have a situation for you. A very powerful man is looking for a new personal assistant. He requires absolute loyalty. He is tired of the people around him who only care about his wealth. He wants someone with a good heart, someone who is unspoiled. Are you that person?" "Yes," Gianna whispered, her own heart pounding so hard she could feel it in her throat. "Good," Noble said. "He will meet you tomorrow. Be at the penthouse of the Presidential Hotel at 5 o'clock sharp. And Gianna, do not be late." Gianna spent the next day in a nervous haze. She picked out her best dress, a simple but elegant one she had made herself. When she walked into the grand opulent lobby of the Presidential Hotel, she felt a wave of insecurity. The floors were made of gleaming marble, and a giant crystal chandelier sparkled above her. She felt like everyone was staring at her simple clothes and warm but clean shoes. She rode the silent, golden elevator all the way to the top floor, her ears popping as it ascended. The door to the penthouse suite opened, and she took a hesitant step inside. The room was breathtaking, larger than any space she had ever been in, with giant windows that offered a stunning panoramic view of Port Harcourt. And there,
He turned around
standing
slowly.
by the window,
He was
with his
even more
back to her,
handsome and
was
imposing in
Maxwell.
person. He looked at her with serious, piercingly intelligent eyes. He took in her simple dress, her nervous posture, and the undeniable strength that shone through her fear. He saw something rare and real. "I have a job for you," Maxwell said, his voice calm and deep, leaving no room for argument. He gestured to a sleek glass table where a black folder lay. Inside was a contract, a paper filled with rules and conditions. "For the next 2 years, you will be my personal assistant. This will require you to postpone your university ambitions. You will work exclusively for me. In exchange, I will settle all of your mother's hospital debts in full. Furthermore, you will receive a monthly salary generous enough to ensure that you and your mother will live in comfort and never have to worry about money again." Gianna stared at the words on the paper. He was asking for 2 years of her life. He was asking her to trade her most precious dream for her mother's health. With a hand that shook so much she could barely hold the pen, she signed her name on the dotted line. Her life was no longer her own. It belonged to Maxwell. A different ending. For 2 years, Gianna lived a life she could never have imagined. She became Maxwell's shadow, organizing his complex schedule, taking notes in high-stakes business meetings, and traveling with him in private jets. Maxwell, in turn, found that he had hired more than just an assistant. He had found a confidant. Gianna was brilliant, intuitive, and fiercely efficient. He began to rely on her judgment, her insights, and her quiet, steady presence. The wall around his heart, built from years of suspicion and betrayal, began to develop cracks. He found himself admiring her, caring for her, and eventually falling in love with her. He believed he had finally found the one truly real person in his world. But Gianna was living a double life. What Maxwell saw as unwavering devotion was, for Gianna, a period of intense, secret education. Every night, after the demanding work of managing Maxwell's empire was done, she would return to the quiet, comfortable apartment he provided for her. There, her second, more important job would begin. She had used a portion of her generous salary to enroll in online law courses from a prestigious university. Surrounded by stacks of textbooks, she studied late into the night, the glow of her laptop a beacon of defiance in the darkness. She was a prisoner, yes, but she was meticulously studying the blueprints of her own escape. The kind updates from Dr. Stephen and the cheerful visits from a nurse named Mitchell, who adored Mama Deborah, only fueled her determination. She was also incredibly shrewd with her money. While Maxwell assumed she was enjoying a life of luxury, Gianna lived with careful frugality. She ensured her mother had the best possible care, a comfortable home, and everything she could ever need. Every other naira, however, was secretly funneled into a carefully managed investment portfolio. She was learning about business from one of the best, and she applied those lessons to her own small, growing fortune. She wasn't just waiting for her 2-year sentence to end, she was building the key to unlock her own cage. The day finally came. It was a clear, bright morning, exactly 2 years to the day she had signed the contract. She walked into Maxwell's vast, sunlit office on the top floor. Melvin, the friendly security guard at the front desk, had smiled and wished her a good morning as she passed. Maxwell was on the phone, but his face lit up when he saw her. He quickly finished his call. "Good morning, Gianna," he said, his voice warm with affection. "What impossible task do we have to conquer today?" "Just one," she said, her voice calm and steady. She placed the crisp white envelope on the polished surface of his desk. "This is my letter of resignation." Maxwell stared at her, the smile vanishing from his face. He let out a short laugh. "A joke? Gianna, this is a very funny joke." "I'm not joking," she said, her expression serious. She placed a second document next to the envelope. It was a cashier's check. "That is the full amount you paid for my mother's hospital care. I have also included 20% interest, compounded over the last 2 years. Our financial agreement is officially concluded." He was utterly speechless. He looked from the check with its impossibly large number to her face. The timid, frightened young woman he had met in the hotel penthouse was gone. In her place stood a woman of formidable confidence and unshakable resolve. "How?" he finally whispered, his voice hoarse. "You taught me," she said, and there was no bitterness in her voice, only fact. "I watched you every day. I listened in every meeting. You taught me how to be strategic, how to manage assets, and how to find leverage where no one else can. You thought you were hiring an assistant, but you were teaching a student. This was a business transaction, Maxwell. And today, I am closing my account." He felt a sharp, painful mix of heartbreak and profound awe. "I don't want the money, Gianna," he said, standing up and walking around his desk to stand closer to her. "I want you. Stay with me. I'll give you anything you want. A partnership, your own company, anything." A sad, knowing smile touched Gianna's lips. "And that is a fundamental difference between us. Maxwell, you believe that everything and everyone can be given or bought. I have learned that the only things in this life that are truly worth having are the ones you earn for yourself. I will be grateful for the rest of my life that you saved my mother. You gave her back her life, but you also try to own my future, and that is something I can never accept." She turned and walked towards the door, her steps confident and sure. She paused with her hand on the handle and looked back at him one last time. "I have been accepted into the University of Port Harcourt Law faculty," she said, her voice ringing with pride. "My classes start next week." Maxwell, the man who could buy entire cities, stood alone in the silence of his vast office, the check on his desk, a stark white monument to his greatest failure. He had sought to purchase a pure heart, but he had only succeeded in forging an unbreakable will. He had lost her, but he had inadvertently created his equal. Gianna walked out of the towering glass building and into the warm, bright sunshine of Port Harcourt. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the familiar, humid air of her home. She was not a billionaire's assistant. She was not a debtor. She was just Gianna. And she was finally, wonderfully, and completely free. If you enjoyed this story, please subscribe and drop comment on what you feel about this story. If you were in her condition, what we would have done differently. Thank you for watching.